Snow White. Snow White. Once upon a time, in a far-off land, there was a lady who wished with all her heart to have a daughter. Year after year passed by, but the little girl she so desperately wished for didn't come. The lady spent her days sewing and embroidering dresses and gowns for little girls, never losing hope that one day she will bring a daughter into this world. One winter day, she was sitting by the window embroidering when a gust of wind pushed it open and piled up some snow onto the windowsill made of black ebony wood. As she got up to close it, she pricked a finger and 3 drops of blood fell onto the white snow. Now, the red looked so well upon the white that she thought to herself, "Oh, how I wish I had a daughter as white as this snow and as red as this blood, and with hair as black as this wood." Not long after, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl who was as white as snow and had rosy cheeks and hair as black as ebony. Therefore, they called her Snow White. Snow White grew up into a happy little girl, beautiful and kind. But one sad day, her dear mother died. About a year later, on his friend's advice, her father married another woman. Snow White's stepmother was exceptionally beautiful, but she was also extraordinarily evil too. Being jealous of Snow White's beauty and loveliness, she was always looking for ways to harm her. Every day she would stand before her magical mirror and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" And it would reply, "You, my lady, are the fairest of the day." But one day, in answer to her usual question, the mirror said, "Snow White is the fairest of the day." You can imagine how this answer angered the stepmother. She immediately began devising ways to get rid of Snow White. She summoned a servant and ordered him to take the little girl to the forest and kill her. Trusting the man completely, Snow White went with the servant. But when she saw him take out the knife, she fell to her knees and started crying, begging for her life. Her tears and beauty touched the servant's heart. "I will spare your life," he said, "but I must take you to the foot of that hill." Snow White agreed and promised that she will not go back to her father's house for as long as her evil stepmother lived there. The servant left her in the middle of the forest, and the night found the poor little girl all alone in the darkness of the woods. After walking for a long time, she reached a little cottage. When she opened the door and took a peek inside, she couldn't believe her eyes. It looked as if dolls lived in it. There was a little table in the middle with 7 little plates and 7 little mugs on it. There was food on each little plate, and as the little girl was very hungry, she took a bite or 2 from each plate and then went upstairs, where there were 7 beds as small as the little table downstairs. "What a strange cottage," thought Snow White. "Whoever lives here must be good and kind, because the whole place is full of flowers." and whoever loves flowers must have a good heart. With these thoughts, tired as she was, she lay across all of the 7 little beds and fell asleep. The cottage belonged to 7 dwarves from the Golden Mountain. They led a quiet life, and no one in the woods ever saw them. They spent their days in the cottage and their nights in the mountains, digging in the mines for gold, which they would then, in great secrecy, give away to poor children. That night too, just before dawn, they left the mines as usual, and, holding their pickaxes over their shoulders, set off for their little house, singing along the way. As soon as they entered, they noticed that someone had been in. "Somebody has eaten my bread," exclaimed the smallest dwarf. "Somebody has drunk my wine," said another. They all determined that there was something missing from each of their plates. After eating what was left of their plates, they went to their bedroom, but as soon as they stepped in, they stopped, puzzled and amazed at the sight in front of them. Lying across all of the 7 little beds, a beautiful girl, as white as snow, and with cheeks as red as blood and hair as black as ebony, was sleeping peacefully. "Who could this be?" asked the first dwarf. "Maybe it's a fairy," remarked another. "No, this is just a gorgeous little girl. It must be," concluded a third. "I say we let her sleep. She must be terribly tired. Let's lie quietly down on the floor beside our beds for the night." The next morning, Snow White opened her eyes and got frightened when she saw the 7 dwarfs. But the dwarfs immediately told her who they were and assured her that she had nothing to be afraid of. Then she told them what had happened to her. Deeply moved by her misfortune, the dwarves invited her to stay in their cottage. "You can cook for us," said the smallest dwarf. "You can stitch our clothes," added another. "You can sing us wonderful songs," remarked a third. And the little bunny, standing outside the door, seemed to agree with the dwarfs. Convinced that she had managed to get rid of her stepdaughter, Snow White's stepmother continued with her life without a care in the world. After some time, wanting to hear that she was the most beautiful woman in the world, she stood before her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" But to her horror, the mirror answered, "Snow White is the fairest of the day." The evil woman immediately sent for the servant, and after questioning him for a long time, the man told her where he had left Snow White. After finding out where the dwarf's cottage was, she disguised herself as a peddler woman and went over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs. When she was close to the cottage, she started calling out, "Fine goods for sale, wonderful ribbons for sale." And thus calling out, she drew many colored ribbons out of her basket and waved with them in the air. At the same time, Snow White was cleaning the cottage, expecting the dwarfs to come home from the mines. As soon as she heard the peddler woman, she called her and bought a blood-red hair ribbon. When the peddler woman left, Snow White stood before the mirror and tied the hair ribbon around her head with a little bow on top. No sooner had she tied the bow, but she fell to the ground as if stricken by a bolt of lightning. The evil woman had sold her a bewitched ribbon that brought death to anyone who would tie it around their head. As soon as the dwarfs entered through the door, they saw beautiful Snow White lying on the floor as if she was dead and burst into tears at once. Grief overtook all but one. The smallest dwarf guessed that the blood-red ribbon was the reason behind this disaster. He immediately untied the ribbon, and Snow White instantly came back to life. At their request, she told them what had happened. They listened to her very carefully and advised her not to open the door for anybody ever again, and not to let anyone inside the house. Snow White promised them that she would follow their advice, and so she stayed inside the cottage for days. She wouldn't even go out to pick some flowers. But her stepmother found out from her mirror that Snow White had managed to survive again, and because of her husband's annoying questions about where Snow White was, she decided to finally get rid of the girl once and for all. She took a few wonderful apples and dipped each one into a strong poison. Then, disguised as an old peasant woman, she went over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs again. When she drew close to the cottage, she started calling out, "Magical apples for sale! Those who buy and taste one will be happy all their lives." After so many days locked up in the cottage, Snow White was longingly looking through the window at the magnificent blue skies and the colorful forest flowers outside. The disguised peasant woman then came close to the window and asked her if she would like to buy her apples. Even though the girl said no, the evil woman went on insisting that she at least taste one of her apples. Tricked by the woman's lies, Snow White took a bite and, in an instant, fell to the ground dead. When the dwarfs came down from the mountain and saw their dear little sister, they burst into tears and did everything they could to bring her back to life. But they couldn't help her no matter what they did. Snow White was dead. Seeing that there was nothing more they could do, they got down to work. They made a crystal case for her. Then they lined it with the most beautiful silk and placed their little sister inside. Then they laid the case at the top of the hill so it can shine in the sunlight. And then one morning, after they had paid their respect to Snow White, as they usually did, they heard some horsemen coming through the forest. Timid as they were, they hid in the nearby thicket and saw a handsome prince with his hunting party ride right past them. Seeing a lovely girl asleep at the top of the hill and amazed by her beauty, he stopped his attendants. He got off his horse and knelt by Snow White. "She's as beautiful as the sun. Oh, how I wish she was alive." He was so taken by her beauty that he could not bear to leave her side. He then ordered his attendants to remove the top of the case, and they hurried to carry out his order at once. In their haste, they accidentally moved the case abruptly, and the poisoned apple that was still in Snow White's mouth fell out onto the pillow, and she opened her eyes. There are no words that can describe the handsome prince's joy at seeing Snow White come alive, and he immediately wished for her to become his wife. At that moment, loud voices and drums were heard coming from the forest. It was Snow White's father with a search party looking for Snow White. He had punished the evil stepmother and went in search of his daughter, determined to find her no matter what the cost. There are no words that... Snow White.